When 18-year-old student Hannah Graham suddenly vanished from her university, family and friends were filled with terror. Detectives were left with the nightmarish task of finding her, which sadly ended in devastation, for Hannah had been murdered. In the aftermath, a combination of surveillance footage and DNA analysis was used to identify her killer, and what they found was far beyond their expectations, because this was not his first time, or even his second. So, with all of the pieces finally put together, who was this monster hiding in the shadows? What did he do to Hannah Graham? Who were his other victims? And how would all of them ultimately miss getting full justice? Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're traveling to Virginia to look at a story that ended with far more victims than initially thought. Now, there are certain things that universities should do to keep their students safe. You know, like adequate background checks on everyone they hire. And while, okay, it's not always so simple, it does make you wonder what would have happened if everyone in this story did their due diligence. By the way, if you're interested in true crime or coffee, then please consider subscribing, as it really does help me out. And also, I post up to 2 times a week here. And before we continue, here's a quick message from this video's sponsor, NordVPN. And Nero, he told me to go dramatic with this one. Password attacks, direct denial of service attacks, malware, and phishing. The year is 2024, and all of us are facing a digital pandemic. In a world where online privacy has become a luxury, hackers, spies, and predators roam the internet to take advantage of you and your data. Cyber threats lurk around every corner. And the terrifying thing is, there is nothing you can do to protect yourself from leagues of digital masterminds. It all begins with an innocent-looking advertisement. The next thing you know, your device has sent its information to a cyber-criminal mastermind. One who then sends malware back to your device, exposing your banking details, personal messages, and even your images. But fear not, there emerges a beacon of hope, a guardian of anonymity, and a shield against all digital intruders, and that guardian is NordVPN. Thanks to NordVPN's built-in threat protection, you never need to worry about malicious sites, downloads, trackers, or intrusive ads. Gone are the days of wondering whether you should click that hyperlink. Nord will tell you if something seems fishy. And that's with a PH, by the way, because Nord protects you from that too. Take that, evil hackers. Nero's financial details are safe for another day. In the last 30 days, Nord has protected me from 60,000 ads and trackers, and detected 1 vulnerability. And thanks to its many servers worldwide, I can also access region-restricted content wherever I want, allowing me to research and create these stories for you without any problems whatsoever. Join the ranks of the digitally enlightened, embrace the power of NordVPN, and reclaim your right to privacy and freedom online. Go to nordvpn.com/coffeehousecrime and get a 2-year plan at a huge discount, plus an additional 4 months for free. It's risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. That's nordvpn.com/coffeehousecrime. And by the way, tell them Nero sent you. Click the link in the description below, and thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. And now with that said, please grab yourself a coffee and let's caffeinate while we investigate. This is the case of Hannah Graham. Welcome to Charlottesville, Virginia, folks. Also known by locals as Seaville, Charlottesville was the home of 2 US presidents, Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe. With a population of around 45,000 people, Charlottesville is a city with plenty to do and without the hustle and bustle of some larger cities. However, don't let its small footprint fool you. It is home to 5 colleges and universities, which help bolster the local economy. Now, despite the high number of students, the city does also unfortunately experience a relatively high crime rate. In fact, when taken as a whole, Charlottesville ranks in the top 3% of highest crime rate communities throughout the entire state. And sadly, this story speaks volumes about that figure. On Friday, September the 12th, 2014, 18-year-old college student Hannah Graham was on a night out with her friends and fellow students. Hannah, who was born on February the 25th, 1996 in Berkshire, England, was the daughter of proud parents Sue and John. The family moved to Charlottesville, Virginia when she was just a young child, and by the year 2014, she had grown to be a popular student at the university who excelled in sports, most specifically softball. At around 7 p.m. that night, Hannah and her friends had been drinking together at a local restaurant named The Fig. With them being students, they were out to have a good time together, and so, quite understandably, the drinks were flowing. And so, after dinner and a few more, they went on to a nearby party with several other students. The drinks were still flowing by midnight, which was around the time that Hannah began to feel sick from all of the alcohol. As a result, she had become quite drunk, and so she told all of her friends that she wanted to go home. Now, although her friends offered to walk her home, Hannah declined them and said that she was fine to do it alone. The walk back wasn't very far anyway, and she was rather comfortable in her environment. None of her friends realized this, but this was actually the last time they would ever see her alive again. And after messaging all of them at 1:30 in the morning, they would never hear from her again either. Now, at first, no one was any wiser, but when Hannah failed to attend a planned event the next day, her friends began to worry. Soon enough, they contacted the police and reported her as missing. With her absence so unusual, this investigation quickly became quite extensive and emotional, and as those hours passed by, her community became more and more worried. So, who precisely was Hannah? And why was everyone so concerned over her safety? When law enforcement began to look into her disappearance and therefore tried to determine where she might have gone, one of the first things that they turned to was surveillance footage. Now, with this being a university, the campus was littered with hundreds of security cameras, and so it is no surprise to learn that there was a lot of footage to go through. With dozens of officers, hundreds of surveillance cameras, and many public volunteers and statements, the authorities were able to rapidly establish a comprehensive timeline. Beginning at around 11:50 p.m. on Friday the 12th, Hannah's friends watched her leave the party at Camden Plaza Apartments on 14th Street Northwest. At around 45 minutes past midnight, which was 55 minutes after leaving the party, she is captured here on a camera outside McGrady's pub. While here, she can be seen wearing the same clothes and possibly looking a little intoxicated. It is also worth mentioning that she seems to stumble and look around as if she is searching for something. 10 minutes later, at 55 minutes past midnight, she is briefly seen on the camera at a Shell gas station located on Preston Avenue. It is noted that this time, she was seen running on the pavement in the background. And although we don't know why she was running, there is no indication or suggestion that she was being chased or followed at this point in time. Witnesses report seeing her shortly after this in a downtown mall before continuing eastwards. And then, at 1:06 a.m., she was again seen outside Sal's Cafe at the 40-second mark. It is also worth noting here that, shortly before this moment, a man with dreadlocks can be seen on the near side of the camera walking from left to right. And then, a few seconds later, he is seen following Hannah back the other way. 2 minutes later, at 1:08 a.m., she is seen on Tule's Jewelers camera. It is rather hard to pick her out of this shot, as it is mainly focused on the interior. However, it did allow authorities to set their timeline for this area and know that she was in that location at that time. 12 minutes later, at 1:20 a.m., Hannah messaged her friends to say that she was lost. She also mentioned that she was near Westland Street and Northwest Street, and that, furthermore, she was heading to another party. But this would be the last time that anyone heard from Hannah, and as for that party, she would never make it there. With so much information at hand, detectives had a lot to work with, but sometimes that can be both a blessing and a curse, because these details made her disappearance extremely concerning, especially when they realized that she was being followed by an unknown man. With this in mind, several high-profile search operations to find Hannah began, with hundreds of professionals and volunteers helping. Unsurprisingly, but that man who was seen following Hannah became an investigation in itself, and on September the 19th, the authorities described him as a person of interest. Interestingly, they already knew who he was. In fact, they searched his house that very same day. But as for the man himself, he was nowhere to be found. Detectives would soon reveal that he was seen exiting a bar with Hannah, and another witness would declare that, apparently, he saw both of them standing next to a car, arguing. And although officers were quite strategic in keeping their suspect unnamed, that would change very, very soon. The very next day, he appeared at a police station and identified himself as Jesse Matthews. However, it appears that he suddenly changed his mind, because only a few seconds later, he ran back to his car and then left the scene at speed. Now, this resulted in him having an additional open charge of reckless driving, and furthermore, officers were now actively seeking to find him. It is no surprise that, only 2 days later, they released his full name to the public. Also known as LJ, Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr. was a 32-year-old man standing at 6 feet and 2 inches. And, unfortunately, he also had quite the checkered past. Now, despite this, Jesse was actually a nursing assistant at the university hospital and also drove a taxi by night. Both of these lines of work involved him interacting with many of the area's students. So, you would have thought that Jesse would have been extensively background checked before being given either of these roles. To recap the situation here, officers determined that he encountered Hannah at Sal's cafe shortly before she messaged her friends that she was lost. After this moment, witnesses reported them arguing in front of a car that matched his vehicle's description, which, quite specifically, was a very distinctive orange-colored Chrysler Sebring. And what's worse, it appeared to others that she refused to get inside. It was stated that, after opening the front door for her to get in, a witness heard her saying, "I'm not getting in that car with you. What is it, stolen?" He was then spotted walking with his arm over Hannah's shoulder. However, when they parted ways, he was seen to pause before then following on after her. No doubt, Jesse felt guilty for Hannah's disappearance, because now he was nowhere to be found. And with his absence extending several days, officers were becoming more suspicious by the hour. Jesse was eventually tracked down 1 week later, but it was nowhere near the university. In fact, he was all the way over in Galveston, Texas. Now, after his relatively short-lived escape, Jesse was charged with abduction with the intent to defile, an unusual and specific charge that, rather conveniently, comes with the requirement to have his DNA taken and sampled, an important detail that would cause more commotion than anyone would have ever initially imagined. Although Jesse had already been arrested, it is no surprise that he remained tight-lipped on Hannah's disappearance, instead trying to claim that he had nothing to do with the situation. Meanwhile, dozens of searchers continued across the local area, and as findings remained slim and more information became available, the search area expanded into the surrounding counties and countryside. With no sign of Hannah, it soon became evident that if she was still in the county, she would likely be in its more rural areas. Comparatively, although the city is 10 square miles in size, it is surrounded by more than 700 square miles of countryside. And so, more and more searches were conducted over this ever-broadening area, with the initial checks on September the 20th, followed by additional police searches on September the 25th and 26th. In addition to this, police and media sources continuously broadcasted information about Hannah. They appealed for anyone with any information to come forward, eventually encouraging those further afar and outside of city limits to check their properties for any signs. And sadly, with this information, on October the 18th, 2014, which was 5 weeks after her disappearance, human remains were discovered in Albemarle County. A body had been found in a creek bed on the land of an abandoned property, deep inside a heavily wooded area. Forensic officers would also discover the same top and pair of jeans that she'd been wearing on the night she disappeared. The property was just off Old Lynchburg Road, a road that runs deep into rural territory, and its desolate location led investigators to believe that whoever had taken her there must have been intimately familiar with the area. By the time the authorities had found the body, decomposition had already heavily set in, making it almost impossible to accurately determine the cause of death. However, around 1 week after the discovery, the authorities were able to confirm that the body did in fact belong to Hannah Graham, officially marking the end of their search operation. They also confirmed that she had very likely died from homicide, though for now, they couldn't determine who by, how, or why. Now, despite this, the examiner did assume that due to lack of any major bones being broken, apart from one in the nose, Hannah likely died from strangulation or suffocation. And that is not all the authorities found out. They would also realize that Jesse's mother lived locally in the area, meaning that Jesse likely had a very good understanding of the terrain.
We have some breaking news to report to you right now. The medical examiner's office for the state has now confirmed that the remains discovered in Albemarle County on October 18th are indeed those of 18-year-old Hannah Graham of Fairfax, Virginia. As you remember, Hannah Graham is the student who went missing from UVA about a month or so ago. There was a massive search to try and find her, and her remains were found October 18th, and the medical examiner has confirmed those remains are indeed those of Hannah Graham. A man named Jesse Matthew has been charged with her abduction. He remains in custody right now in Charlottesville. WJLA has a crew on the way to Charlottesville. We will have a complete story for you on this later tonight. Once again, Hannah Graham from Fairfax County, Virginia, discovered October 18th. Her remains have positively been identified by the medical examiner's office, and we will keep you updated on this breaking story. By the way, the authorities in Charlottesville have expressed prayers going out to the Graham family, and her family has now asked that the public respect their privacy during this time.
Assumptions aside, it wouldn't take long for DNA analysis to reveal the ugly truth. Samples taken from Jesse's car confirmed that, at some point in time, Hannah Graham had entered his vehicle while she was still alive, and coupled with witness testimonies, this put Jesse in very hot water. But that was not all the DNA analysis would unearth. In fact, many dark secrets ran far beyond this story. With Jesse's DNA now in the system, they were able to crash it against every other case in the area. And soon enough, a positive match was made between his DNA and DNA found at a crime scene back in the year 2009. Only this one was never solved. 5 years prior, 19-year-old Morgan Harrington's disappearance gripped the area's attention. Now, Morgan was a student from a nearby university, and she too vanished under similar circumstances. On the night of her disappearance, Morgan had been attending a Metallica concert with friends. The evening between them was well underway when she stepped out to the bathroom, only Morgan never returned after that. Concerned for her safety, her friends contacted her by phone. Morgan explained that she had walked out of the venue, but was no longer allowed back in by security. She then told her friends not to worry and that they should carry on with their night. Her friends highlighted that they still had her keys with them inside of the venue, but Morgan didn't seem too bothered. Instead, she said that she was fine and that she could make her own way back home. However, once the concert was over, no one could reach Morgan. Her phone appeared to be switched off, and all calls were going straight to voicemail. Things would only get worse after this. When her friends returned to the apartment they were staying in, they then realized that she wasn't with her roommates either. And so, it is no surprise that the next thing they did was report her as missing to the authorities. And tragically, that was the last time they would ever hear from Morgan. And despite a very extensive search operation, she was never found alive. Now, the police would actually find her purse and even her phone early on in the investigation, but sadly, those hopes were short-lived. Now, several witnesses did come forward to report seeing her in the hours after her disappearance, where some remember seeing her leave the venue alone, others recall seeing her walking along the road later that night, but despite all of these sightings, no one knew where she went. And then, 1 month later, the shirt that Morgan wore that night was suddenly found in a bushy area outside of the university. Several hairs found on the shirt were analysed and ultimately deemed to belong to both Morgan and an unknown individual. And of course, 4 years later, that unknown person would turn out to be Jesse. Sadly, despite hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, an extensive search operation, and even a $100,000 reward added by Metallica themselves, there was no sign of Morgan. Morgan's case achieved widespread attention. In fact, her disappearance provoked fear that maybe a serial killer might be living in Virginia. But despite the notoriety of this case and almost 2 months of searching, efforts unfortunately were ultimately called off. The friends and family of Morgan remained in agonizing limbo for a while longer, but in January of 2010, a farmer would stumble across a horrifying discovery, that being the skeletal remains of Morgan. An autopsy conducted on her body would conclude a few noteworthy observations. It was noted that the victim had suffered from fairly substantial trauma, with multiple bones in the face being broken. Given what we know about Jessie, it is no surprise to learn that her body was recovered less than 5 miles away from the place where Hannah was found 4 years later. Morgan's case aside, Jessie's grubby handprints were found elsewhere too. His DNA positively matched another crime scene dated back to the year 2005, where an unknown assailant had attempted to sexually assault another young woman. In addition to these 3 crimes, he was linked to another sexual crime in Fairfax in 2012, making it the 4th crime scene that his DNA was attached to. Tragically, that was not the end of it, because other stories were now beginning to connect to his despicable profile too. 1 decade prior, in the year 2002, Jessie was also suspected of sexual assault on another student. He had been attending Liberty University for 3 years at the time, when he suddenly was accused of assault. Lucky for him, but not for anyone else, the case was eventually dropped when the victim declined to move forward. Jessie left university shortly after these allegations, where he transferred to Christopher Newport University and played for their football team, and where, once again, he was accused of sexual assault on campus. This case was also dropped, where Jessie simply dropped out of school, and so, with his DNA now in the database, and a fine lens placed over this monster's reckless behavior, the prosecution was left with 4 crime scenes and 6 disgusting stories. So, moving into the legal proceedings of this case, when Jessie appeared in court to face his charges, a plea bargain had already been arranged, therefore sparing him the death penalty. And what is worse, an Alford plea was offered to Jessie, meaning he didn't have to admit guilt to murdering Hannah or Morgan. In fact, all he had to do was sign a statement stating that he understood that the prosecution likely had enough evidence to convict him. Now, Alford pleas are sometimes worthwhile, but definitely not in this situation, and in a way took some of the justice away from Hannah's and Morgan's families. I mean, if you think about it, it was basically a deal on a sentence, and furthermore took some of that accountability away. Anyway, he would eventually agree to the Alford plea in exchange for lifelong imprisonment, and still, to this day, the exact cause of death to Hannah and Morgan remains unproven. Jessie's admission to homicide resulted in 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility for parole. The capital murder charge was dropped in exchange for his guilty plea, solidified on March 2nd, 2016, when he signed a comprehensive 21-page statement detailing his involvement in Hannah's fate. Currently, Jessie serves his sentence in the high-security Red Onion Supermax prison in Virginia, which is renowned for its remote location and minimal escape opportunities. In 2019, he was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer and transferred to Sussex State Prison near Richmond for treatment. Naturally, the media were rather quick to stir the pot and asked Morgan's mother for comment, and this is what she had to say.
I have never been directing my energies in the rearview mirror and towards punishment and retribution.
And Jill Harrington says that hasn't changed even with news that Jesse Matthew, the man who murdered her 20-year-old daughter Morgan in 2009, has been diagnosed with cancer.
So I'm not fist bumping and happy that he has a challenging diagnosis. He received 7 life sentences for his crimes. And if that life is to be shorter than we expected, I am fine also with that.
Harrington says the legacy being built through Help Save the Next Girl, the nonprofit formed in Morgan's honor, continues to be her family's focus and not a focus on Matthew's fate.
Once he was stopped, whatever justice came forth, I was very comfortable with. And, you know, perhaps this is his destiny and his karma.
Whatever his fate may be, may the rest of it be behind bars and fraught with regret. Although our story today began with Hannah Graham, we have finished with another victim, Morgan Harrington. Both women were young, with their entire lives ahead of them, and it's a tragedy that both are now gone, taken by a man who held no regard for their worth. Hannah Graham was 18 years old when she had just started her second year of study, and when she was cruelly taken from the world. She embraced life in the US with enthusiasm, and was described as optimistic and happy, bright and personable, trusting, and extremely loyal to her friends without prejudice. She had great empathy, enjoyed helping others, and was delighted to contribute to her communities. Hannah hoped to pursue a career in global public health and intended to apply to a special program in this field at UVA. She had enormous potential, and the world will miss the great things that she would have achieved and contributed. Morgan was a 20-year-old Virginia Tech student in her third year of completing her education degree, when she took the night off to hang out with her friends and attend a Metallica concert. She is remembered as a shiny, loving, beautiful original. She was an avid music fan, a champion of children's rights, and planned a career in education. And her parents say that the world has lost its best hugger. To this day, she is remembered and mourned by all who knew her. Since her death, her parents have founded a charity in her memory named Help Save the Next Girl. Meanwhile, Hannah's parents have established several charities and memorials in her name that seek to remember her for who she was and the good she brought into the world. There is also a scholarship in her name and a memorial that stands to this day at the university she attended. There is no amount of justice in the world that will help make these broken families feel whole again, and no amount of money or words will make up for what was taken from them during those terribly dark days. All we can hope and do is maintain the memories of these young women as they were in their lives. It's another one of those stories where it's like picking apart a ball of yarn and not realizing how long that string goes. Unfortunately, we thought that maybe Hannah was the only victim to Jesse, but as we know now, he had terrorized plenty of other women in the past. At least now he is thankfully off the streets and behind bars for life, but it did come at the cost of 2 murders and several other victims. Whatever they are, share your thoughts in the comment section down below, and thank you so much for making it this far in the video. I really do appreciate you being here. And thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. Go to nordvpn.com/coffeehousecrime to get a 2-year plan at a huge discount, plus 4 additional months for free. If you'd like to get early access to my videos or support the channel, check out my Patreon here. Alternatively, check out my social media here, most notably my Instagram. And yeah, that's pretty much the end of the video, folks. Thank you again so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you again very, very soon for another one. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and as always, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.